The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything before Amara even finished reading it. She was standing in the narrow kitchen of her father's house, still wearing the plain cotton dress she had slept in, when her younger sister Grace pushed the envelope through the door without a word. There was no sender's name on the front, just her name, written in careful black ink. Amara. Not Miss Amara. Not Amara Osei. Just Amara, as though whoever wrote it already knew that no other title attached itself comfortably to her. Her father, Harold Osei, was already sitting at the table behind her. He had his tea in both hands and his eyes on the window, watching his neighbor's farm the way he always did in the morning, counting rows of crops that were not his but somehow felt like a measure of everything he had failed to grow. He did not look at her when she opened the letter. He rarely looked at her at all unless there was something to criticize. The letter was from an employment agency in the district town. It was short, 2 paragraphs. It said there was a cleaning and domestic position available at a small accounting firm called Birch & Lowe Financial Services. The hours were long. The pay was modest. They had been referred to her name by a woman in the village who sometimes placed rural girls in town work. The agency did not explain why they thought she might be suitable. Domestic work required no qualifications, and she had none that anyone recognized. Her father set down his tea. "What is it?" he asked. She told him. He looked at the letter for a moment, then looked at her, the way he sometimes did, not with cruelty exactly, but with a kind of tired disappointment that sat heavier than cruelty would have. Harold Osei was not a bad man. He was a man who had wanted 3 capable children and felt he had been given 2.5. The half was Amara. "Domestic work," he said. "Yes. At least it is something." That was all he said. He picked up his tea again and went back to looking at the neighbor's rows. And Amara stood there holding the letter, feeling the familiar press of that word, something, as though all the years of her life up to this point had been carefully adding up to nothing, and now at least she had arrived at something, which was the lowest category above nothing that existed in Harold Osei's private arithmetic. She was 22 years old. Her older sister Lydia had married a man with a transport business at 19. Her younger sister, Grace, was already engaged to a teacher at the secondary school and would be married by the end of the rains. Both weddings had been celebrated in the courtyard of Harold's house with food and music, and neighbors pressing Harold's hand with congratulations. After Lydia's wedding, a woman named Auntie Vera, who knew everything about everyone in the village, had put her arm around Harold's shoulders and said warmly, "2 down, 1 more to go." Then she had looked at Amara with a smile that contained something other than warmth, and said nothing more. Amara had understood perfectly. The village had a clear system for measuring a woman's worth. The system was not hidden or complicated. It ran on a few simple ingredients: beauty, temperament, a willingness to work the land, and the speed with which a man came asking for her. Amara had none of these in quantities that impressed anyone. She was not plain, but she was quiet in a way that made her seem plain. She worked, but not with the cheerful visible effort that earned praise. She had no interest in the men who occasionally looked her way, because she had noticed early that every man who looked her way had stopped looking the moment she opened her mouth about something that mattered to her. What mattered to Amara was numbers. This was not a thing she had chosen. It had simply happened, the way some children discover they can draw or sing, not because anyone taught them, but because something in the brain clicks against a particular shape of the world and refuses to let go. Amara's brain clicked against numbers. It had always been this way. When she was 9 years old, her father had sent her to the market with a list and a small sum of money to buy supplies for the household. She returned with everything on the list, with change to spare, and with a folded piece of paper on which she had written every transaction she had made, with the price of each item, the vendor's name, and a running total. Harold had stared at the paper for a long moment. Then he had looked at his 9-year-old daughter, and for one brief second something had shifted in his face. It might have been wonder. Then he had folded the paper and put it in his pocket and said, "Good girl. Go and help your mother." He never mentioned the paper again. But Amara had not stopped making them. Through all the years that followed, through school and market trips and harvest seasons, she kept a notebook. It was a cheap school exercise book with a green cover, and in it she recorded everything that moved through numbers in her world. Household expenses, crop yields, the prices of goods from week to week, the wages paid to workers on the neighboring farms, the difference between what things cost and what people said they cost. She did not do this because anyone asked. She did it because not doing it would have felt like leaving something unfinished, like a sentence with no full stop. Her mother, Clara, had found the notebook once, 2 years before she died. Clara had sat with it for a long time at the kitchen table, turning the pages carefully, looking at the columns of figures that her daughter had been keeping in secret for years. Then she had set it down, and looked out of the window with an expression that Amara could not fully read. Not disapproval, not pride, something between them that had no name. "You have a strange mind," Clara had said softly. Amara had not known whether that was a good thing or not. Clara died when Amara was 17, quietly and without ceremony, leaving behind a house where Harold's disappointment had no one left to soften it, and 3 daughters who were now each on their own with whatever they had been given. What Amara had been given was the notebook, the strange mind, and the letter. She packed a small bag the following morning. Harold did not see her off. He was already in the field when she walked down the red dirt road toward the main road, where the bus to town came through every morning at 7:30. Grace stood at the gate and waved. Lydia sent a message through Grace that she wished her well. Neither of them said anything about coming back soon, because they both understood without saying it that Amara was not coming back soon. She was going to domestic work in a firm that handled other people's money, and she was going to start at the bottom, and she was going to be there for a long time. None of them knew what she was carrying in her bag. The green notebook, 4 years of figures, a mind that had never once been wrong about a number. That was not something. That was everything. The bus was crowded and smelled of dust and engine heat, and Amara sat by the window with her bag on her lap and watched the flat land give way to the cluster of low buildings that made up the district town. She pressed her hand against the green cover of the notebook through the bag's fabric. Not for comfort exactly, but the way you press your hand against something real when the world is changing fast, and you need to remind yourself what belongs to you. What belonged to her was this: her mind, her records, her years of quiet, unwitnessed work. She was going to find out what they were worth. She arrived at Birch & Lowe Financial Services on a Wednesday morning, 40 minutes early, and nobody noticed. This was not unusual. Amara had spent most of her life arriving at things early and not being noticed. She stood outside the building for a moment, a 2-story structure on a narrow street in the older part of the district town, with a metal sign above the door and the kind of paint on the walls that suggested the business was respectable but not rich. And then she pushed the door open and went in. The front office had 3 desks, 2 of which were occupied by men in white shirts who did not look up when she entered. The 3rd desk belonged to a woman named Patricia, who was the office administrator and the person Amara had been told to report to. Patricia was in her 50s, with reading glasses she wore on her head, and moved to her nose with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She looked at Amara the way most people looked at anyone arriving for domestic work, not unkindly, but with a certain brief assessment that placed her immediately in the category of staff rather than person. "You are the new cleaning girl," Patricia said. "Yes," Amara said. "Good. The brooms are in the storeroom. You start at 6 in the morning, before the accountants come in. You finish at 4. You do not touch any papers on the desks. You do not ask questions about what is on the papers. You clean, you make tea when it is asked for, and you stay out of the way. Do you understand?" "Yes," Amara said. Patricia nodded and handed her a gray apron that was slightly too large. Amara put it on, found the brooms, and got to work. The office at Birch & Lowe had 4 rooms. The front office with the 3 desks, a smaller back office used by the firm's 2 senior accountants, George Birch and David Lowe, though David Lowe had retired 2 years ago and the name remained only on the sign, a records room, which was a narrow space along the back wall lined with shelves of box files arranged by year, and a small room at the end of the corridor that was used for meetings with clients, with a table and 4 chairs and a window that looked out onto the back lane. Amara cleaned all 4 rooms every morning between 6 and 8, before the staff arrived. She mopped floors, wiped surfaces, emptied the metal bins beside each desk into a larger bag she carried down the stairs to the building's rear entrance. She made tea at 10 and at 3. She was invisible to everyone in the office within 2 weeks of starting, which was exactly what she needed. Because the thing about being invisible is that it gives you an extraordinary view. The accountants at Birch & Lowe were not bad at their work. They were simply people who had done the same work for many years, and people who do the same work for many years develop small habits of inattention. They stopped double-checking the things they had always checked. They trusted colleagues with portions of work they should have reviewed themselves. They talked about their calculations at their desks in voices that carried clearly to anyone standing behind them with a mop. Amara listened to all of it. She noted none of it visibly. She kept her face blank and her hands busy and her attention absolute. She had brought the green notebook and 3 new ones. She did not write in them at work. She wrote in them at night, in the small room she rented from a woman named Phyllis, 3 streets from the office. A room barely large enough for the narrow bed and the single wooden chair beside the window where she sat with her notebooks after supper. She wrote down everything she had heard, everything she had observed, everything she had worked out in her head while mopping floors and carrying tea and being invisible. The agency had placed her in a cleaning job. She was giving herself an education. There was a junior clerk at the firm named Oliver. Oliver was 25 and had recently finished a basic accounting certificate and was very proud of both facts. He was not incompetent, but he was careless in the way that young people who have been praised too quickly often are. He moved fast, logged numbers without cross-checking, and spent the last 20 minutes of each afternoon tidying his desk rather than reviewing his morning's work. 3 weeks after Amara started, Oliver made an error. It was not a dramatic error. It was the kind that hides well. A transposition of 2 digits in a client's expense record that shifted a figure by 432 units in the wrong direction. The kind of error that might not surface for weeks, buried in the averaging of larger accounts. Amara saw it on a Thursday morning when she was wiping the surface of the desk beside Oliver's. He had left the ledger open when he went to get tea. The page was facing her. She saw the transposed figure in less than 8 seconds. She did not say anything. She could not say anything. She was the cleaning girl. She went back to the storeroom, finished her shift, walked home, sat at her window chair, and wrote down the error exactly as she had seen it. The account number, the incorrect figure, the correct figure, and the difference, along with the date and the page number of the entry. Then she dated her own note and continued with the rest of what she had learned that week. On the following Monday, the error surfaced when a client called in about a discrepancy. There was a tense hour in the back office. Oliver was called in. His face went the color of old paper. George Birch, the senior accountant, spent 40 minutes going back through the records to find the source. Amara had already found it 4 days ago. She said nothing that day. But the following morning she left her green notebook open on the edge of the records room shelf, the shelf closest to the corridor. With the page showing her note about the error face up, she knew George Birch passed the records room every morning at exactly 8:15 on his way to the kettle. At 8:37, she heard footsteps pause outside the records room. A silence, then footsteps continuing. At 9:15, George Birch came to find her. She was in the front office wiping the window ledge. "This notebook," he said. He was holding it. His voice was careful, balanced between surprise and something she could not name yet. "Is this yours?" "Yes," she said. "This entry here." He opened to her page. "You wrote this before the error was found?" "Thursday morning," she said. "I saw it when the ledger was open on the desk." He looked at her for a long moment. She kept her hands on the window ledge and did not look away. "You saw this in a few seconds," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," she said. Another silence. "And these other entries?" He had turned back several pages and was looking at the weeks she had been recording observations. He had not expected that. His eyebrows moved, just slightly, as he read. "I keep records," she said. "I always have." George Birch was 61 years old and had been running this firm for 30 years. He had a way of standing that suggested he had heard everything worth hearing and been surprised by very little. But in this moment he looked at the woman in the gray apron with the window cloth in her hand, and he was visibly, unmistakably surprised. He raised her pay by 15% the following week. He gave her no desk. She noted that too. The weeks that followed were a kind of double life. By morning she was still the cleaning girl. The apron, the mop, the tea at 10 and 3, the invisibility that everyone in the office maintained without effort or intention. By night she was something else entirely. She was a student of every paper that had passed through her field of view. She was tracking patterns across multiple clients' accounts, the way certain numbers recurred, the way certain types of entries were made differently by different clerks, the small inconsistencies that appeared and disappeared without anyone connecting them. She found 2 more errors in Oliver's work over the following month. She documented both. She also found an anomaly in a long-term client account that had nothing to do with Oliver at all, an account that went back 4 years and showed a pattern of rounding that, examined closely, did not look like rounding. It looked like something being taken. She did not know whose hands were involved. She did not have access to enough records to be certain. The records room shelf contained only 3 of the last 4 years of client files, and the furthest year back was locked in a cabinet she had no key to. She was not going to touch the cabinet. She was not going to ask. She was going to wait. She had been waiting her entire life. She was very good at it. What she had not expected was that the waiting would end, not because of anything she did, but because of a phone call that George Birch received on a damp afternoon in November, in the back office, with the door not quite fully closed. The name she heard through that gap in the door was one she had heard before, in the conversations of people in the district town who spoke about the kind of success that made others adjust their posture and lower their voices when they mentioned it. Musa Okafor, the wealthiest landowner in the district. 3 farms, 2 warehouses, a transport business with 12 vehicles on the road. A man who had built everything he had from a starting point that people argued about. Some said he had come from nothing. Some said his father had left him a single plot of land, and the truth was probably somewhere between the two. What was not argued about was what he had now. What he had now was considerable, and it was bleeding, and he did not yet know how much. George Birch's voice through the door was careful, professional, but Amara could hear something underneath the professionalism, a hesitation, the sound of a man who knew he was being asked for something he could not fully deliver. "We will do our best," George Birch said. After he hung up, there was a long silence from the back office. Amara continued wiping the corridor wall and said nothing. 3 days later, George Birch came to find her in the storeroom. This time he did not hold the notebook. He did not seem uncertain. He stood in the doorway with his hands clasped, and his face arranged in the expression of someone about to say something he had already argued with himself about many times. "There is a client," he said. "He has a situation with his accounts that my team has not been able to resolve to his satisfaction. The problem is in the records going back at least 4 years. It is not simple work." Amara waited. "I mentioned your name," George Birch said, as someone with a particular eye for figures. She looked at him. "He wants to meet you," he said. She set down the cleaning cloth. She untied the gray apron. She folded it neatly over the storeroom shelf. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," George Birch said. "His office. He will send a car." He said this last thing, "He will send a car," as though it underlined the seriousness of what was happening, the weight of the name attached to it. He was not wrong to underline it, but Amara was not thinking about the car. She was thinking about 4 years of records and what she might find inside them, and whether what she had noticed from a distance in one locked cabinet's shadow was the beginning of a pattern that someone had believed was too well hidden to find. She went home that night and sat at her window chair until almost 2 in the morning. She did not write in her notebook. She simply sat, in the way she always sat before she began something that mattered, still, thinking, measuring the size of the work against what she had. She had a mind that had never once been wrong about a number. She had 4 notebooks filled with 4 months of observations. She had been called useless by a man she loved, for so many years that the word had become part of the furniture of her interior life, a thing she walked past every morning without examining, the way you stop seeing a stain on a wall after it has been there long enough. She was going to walk into the office of the wealthiest man in the district, and she was going to sit across from 4 years of tangled accounts, and she was going to find what was in them. Not for him. Not to prove anything to George Birch or Oliver or the village women who had clicked their tongues or Auntie Vera with her warm smile containing things other than warmth. She was going to do it because it was the thing she was built for, because it was the thing she had been practicing in secret since she was 9 years old, because somewhere in those 4 years of records, a number was wrong, and a wrong number, to Amara, was like an unfinished sentence. It demanded a full stop. The car came at 8 in the morning. It was a clean, dark vehicle, with a driver who did not speak much, which suited Amara perfectly. She sat in the back with her bag on her lap, the same bag she had carried on the bus from the village 3 years ago, though now it held 4 notebooks instead of 1, and a fresh pencil case with 3 sharpened pencils and 2 black pens she had bought the night before specifically for this day. She looked out of the window as the town streets gave way to wider roads, and the wider roads opened into the landscape that surrounded the district like a border. Low hills in the distance, wide stretches of flat cultivated land, the occasional stand of trees marking property lines. She had never had occasion to travel this far out of the town center before. She had never had occasion to travel anywhere by car before. She noticed all of it and filed none of it away as remarkable. She was saving her attention for what was coming. Musa Okafor's main office was not at his farm. It was in a low, wide building set back from the road, behind a painted gate, with a small garden in front that someone maintained very carefully. A man met her at the gate and walked her through without ceremony. There were 3 people visible through glass windows as she passed. A woman at a telephone, 2 men working at wide desks covered in papers. Everyone was busy. The building had the feeling of a place where work happened continuously, without pause. The man who met her at the gate took her to a room at the far end of the corridor and opened the door. Musa Okafor was already standing. He was perhaps 60, or close to it. A large man, broad across the shoulders, with a face that had spent many years in outdoor weather and showed it. He had the kind of physical presence that filled a room without effort, The kind that came not from height or size alone but from decades of being the person in every room who had the most to lose and had not lost it. His hands, resting on the desk, were wide and work-scarred. He wore no tie. He looked at her the way she had been looked at many times before, a brief assessment, placing her in a category. But his eyes, she noticed, did not stay in the category once they arrived there. They moved. They were paying attention. "You are the woman from Birch and Lowe," he said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. "George Birch says you have a particular eye for figures." "I believe so." He was quiet for a moment. Then he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Sit." She sat. He sat. He folded his hands. "I am going to tell you something I have not told George Birch," he said, "because I am not certain George Birch can solve my problem, and I do not want to waste time on people who cannot solve it. I want to know very quickly whether you can." She said nothing. She waited. "For 3 years, possibly 4, I have felt that something is wrong in my accounts. Not in an obvious way. Nothing is missing dramatically enough to catch in a monthly review. But when I look at the totals across all 3 farms and both warehouses and the transport business, and I compare them to what I believe those operations should be producing, there is a gap. Not large enough to be obvious, large enough to matter." He was watching her carefully as he said this. "Have you given the accounts to an auditor before?" she asked. "Once, 2 years ago, he found nothing." "Which records did he review?" "The main ledgers for the past 2 years. Not the detailed transaction records underneath." His eyes changed slightly. Not surprise exactly. More like the recognition of a specific kind of attentiveness. "No," he said. "He said it was not necessary for the scope of the audit." Amara said nothing for a moment. Then, "If the issue goes back 4 years, and the auditor only reviewed 2 years of main ledgers, he was looking at the part of the water that shows above the surface. The problem, if there is one, would be in what is underneath." Musa Okafor was very still. "What exactly are you saying?" he said. "I am saying that the gap you feel is likely not an accounting error," she said. "Accounting errors produce irregular gaps, a gap that appears consistently, across multiple operations, over multiple years, and stays within a range small enough to avoid easy detection. That is a pattern. A deliberate pattern is different from an error." The room was very quiet. He looked at her for a long moment. The assessment in his eyes had shifted entirely. The category he had placed her in when she walked through the door was gone. He was looking at her now the way you look at something you have underestimated and are recalibrating in real time. "George Birch said you are the cleaning staff," he said. "I am," she said. "And you worked this out from cleaning the office." "I worked this out from being in the office," she said. "People talk around cleaning staff the way they talk around furniture. Furniture learns a great deal." He unclenched his hands and placed them flat on the desk. "I need you to look at everything," he said. "All 4 years, every ledger, every receipt, every delivery manifest, every wage record for every farm in both warehouses, and every vehicle in the transport operation. I need to know if there is a pattern, who made it, and how much it has cost me." She looked at the desk between them. "I will need 1 week," she said. "Working through the night if necessary. Access to all the records, including anything locked in storage. No interruptions while I work, and no staff member to know what I am reviewing until I am finished." He nodded. "One condition," he said. She waited. "If you find nothing, I pay you for your time, and we are finished. If you find something, you bring it to me first, before anyone else. Directly to me." "Agreed," she said. He stood and extended his hand. She stood and shook it. His grip was firm and brief, the kind of handshake that belonged to someone who had signed many agreements and knew the weight of them. "The records room is at the end of the east corridor," he said. "My assistant will bring you everything. You start today." She started today. The records room at Musa Okafor's office was not narrow, like the one at Birch and Lowe. It was a proper room with 3 long shelves on each of the 4 walls, floor to ceiling, and a wide table in the center with good overhead lighting. The files were organized by year and operation, a different color of binder for each of the 3 farms, a different system again for the warehouses, a loose collection of transport records that had been kept more casually, and would require the most patience to reconstruct. Musa's assistant, a quiet young man named Conrad, brought her everything she asked for and left without asking questions. She appreciated this. She opened the first file, a farm operations ledger from 4 years ago, and read the first page with the focused stillness of someone who has come home after a very long journey. For the next 6 days, she barely left the room. Conrad brought food at regular intervals and she ate without looking up from the pages. She slept on a narrow bench along one wall. never more than 4 hours at a stretch, setting an alarm on the small clock she had brought in her bag. She filled 3 pages of notebook for every file she completed, building a parallel set of records on paper, her own version of 4 years of transactions, reconstructed from the ground up, without the gaps and smoothed-over lines that someone had embedded in the originals. Because there were gaps. She found the first one on the second day, in the warehouse records for the farther of the 2 warehouses. It was not in the main ledger, it was in the detailed goods received records, in a column that tracked the movement of harvested crops from the farms into storage. The column showed quantities received. The column beside it showed quantities released to buyers. The column at the far right showed the difference, the amount remaining in storage at any given point. For 43 weeks across 2 years, the remaining column had been adjusted, not dramatically, never by more than 4 to 6% of the total figure, but consistently, in the same direction, always downward, always in the warehouse furthest from the main office. She kept reading. By day 3 she had found the same pattern in the second warehouse, slightly more carefully concealed, stretching back only 2.5 years. By day 4 she had traced it into the farm records themselves, not the main ledger, but the daily harvest tallies kept by the farm supervisors. The adjustment happened somewhere between the tally and the warehouse record. The figures entered at the farm were correct. By the time they reached the warehouse column, they had shrunk. Someone was sitting in the middle of the chain. By day 5 she knew who. Not by name. She did not have access to personnel files, but she knew the position. The adjustments followed the movement of one specific record, a weekly reconciliation report that was prepared by a single role, the logistics coordinator. The logistics coordinator was the person whose job connected the farm tally to the warehouse record and the warehouse record to the buyer invoice. He was the only person who touched all 3. By day 6 she knew the total. She sat with that number for a long time. It was not a small number. She wrote it down at the top of a clean page of her notebook, underlined it once, and then wrote beneath it everything that supported it. The weeks, the operations, the adjusted columns, the pattern of decrements, the reconstructed totals that the accounts should have shown against the totals that had been recorded. She wrote 11 pages. Every line was supported by a file reference. Every conclusion was traceable back to a specific document. On the morning of the 7th day, she asked Conrad to tell Musa Okafor she was ready. He came within the hour. She laid the 11 pages on the wide table beside the 4 years of files, and she stood to one side and let him read. He read in silence, all 11 pages. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions while he was reading. He read with the same focused stillness she had seen in herself for the past 6 days, the stillness of someone encountering something that has weight. When he finished, he set the last page down on the table with great care. He looked at the figure she had underlined at the top of the first page. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he looked at her. "The logistics coordinator," he said. "Yes. You are certain?" "Everything I have written is documented," she said. "Every line has a file reference. You can verify any of it against the original records." He looked at the 11 pages again. 4 years, he said. 3 years and 8 months, she said. "The pattern begins in the records for the 3rd quarter of the first year I reviewed. Before that, everything reconciles." He stood up slowly, the way very large men stand when the weight of a thought is added to the weight of their body. "How much can be recovered?" he asked. "I cannot say with certainty. Some of what is documented went through a chain that may be difficult to trace to a physical source now. But if legal action is taken and the records I have prepared are used, I believe a significant portion can be recovered. A lawyer would need to advise on the exact amount." He nodded. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the first meeting, but differently now. In the first meeting, the recalibration had been about what she knew. Now it was about something else, something that did not translate easily into the language of accounts and figures. It was the look of a man who had expected competence and encountered something that exceeded the category of competence by a distance he had not been ready for. "What do you want?" he asked. She looked at him. "I mean, what do you want as payment?" he said. "Name your figure. Do not be modest about it." She thought about this. She thought about the gray apron on the storeroom shelf. She thought about the narrow room at Phyllis's house and the window chair and the 4 notebooks she had filled in the evenings over the past 3 years. She thought about George Birch's face when he said he will send a car, as though the car were the remarkable thing. She named a figure. His eyebrows moved. "That is modest," he said. "That is what I need for the next 12 months, she said. "After that, I would like to discuss a different arrangement." He looked at her carefully. "What kind of arrangement?" "I do not want to be the cleaning girl," she said. "I want to be your head bookkeeper. I want a desk, a proper title, access to all records, and the authority to implement a new reconciliation system across all your operations so that this does not happen again. The room was very quiet. Musa Okafor looked at the 11 pages on the table. He looked at the shelves of files she had worked through in 6 days and nights. He looked at her standing beside the table with her hands at her sides and her eyes steady and her face showing nothing except what she actually felt, which was not nerves and was not pride but was simply the particular calm of someone who has been right about something for a very long time and has finally arrived at the place where being right is permitted to matter. "When can you start?" he asked. "I already have," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. The desk they gave her was in a room she had not seen during the first week. A proper office, smaller than Musa Okafor's but private, with a window that looked out over the garden at the front of the building. The desk was heavy wood, wide enough to spread multiple ledgers open at once. There was a filing cabinet along the wall. There was a lamp. There was a chair that had actual armrests. Amara sat in it on her first official morning as head bookkeeper of the Okafor business operations, set her 4 notebooks in the filing cabinet, placed her pencil case on the desk, and opened the first of a new set of files she had requested, the complete personnel and payroll records for the logistics department. She had work to do. The logistics coordinator, whose name was Franklin, had been dismissed by the time she arrived at her new desk. Musa had acted on her report the morning after she delivered it, quietly, without drama, with the efficiency of someone who had been in business long enough to know that public confrontations serve no one, and clean endings serve everyone. Franklin was gone. The legal process for recovering the taken funds was already in the hands of a solicitor Musa trusted. The case was not Amara's concern anymore. What was her concern was everything else. Everything else was considerable. The Okafor operations had 3 farms, 2 warehouses, and a transport fleet that ran 12 vehicles across 4 routes. Each arm of the operation had its own bookkeeping system, and none of the 3 systems spoke clearly to the others. The farm records used one method of accounting for harvest yields. The warehouses used a different method for received and released goods. The transport records were kept in a format that was not consistent from driver to driver, and in 2 cases had not been consistently kept at all. The result was exactly what Musa had described in the first meeting, a gap between what the operations should produce and what the accounts showed. The gap was not entirely explained by Franklin's activities. Part of it was simply the accumulated noise of systems that did not align. Amara spent the first 2 weeks mapping it. She created a master chart that showed every point at which one system's records needed to speak to another's, where a farm tally needed to match a warehouse receipt, where a warehouse release needed to match a buyer invoice, where a transport log needed to reconcile with a fuel and maintenance record. She marked every point where the current systems failed to connect clearly. There were 14 such points. One by one, she designed a connection for each. This was not dramatic work. It was the kind of work that takes place in near silence, in a room with good light, by someone who thinks in structures and can hold multiple systems in mind at once without losing the thread. It was the work Amara had been practicing, without knowing she was practicing it, since she was 9 years old at a market stall with a list and a sum of money and a folded piece of paper she created, because not creating it would have felt wrong. By the end of the first month, she had presented Musa with a new reconciliation framework, a set of protocols that standardized how each arm of the operation recorded its data, how often it was cross-checked, and who was responsible for which verification. He read it in the same careful silence with which he had read her 11-page report. Then he approved it entirely. Word moved through the building. It moved the way word always moves in a workplace where something significant is changing, quietly at first, through sideways looks and brief conversations that stop when the relevant person enters the room. 2 of the men who worked at the wide desks in the front section did not look at her directly for the first 2 weeks. One of them, a man named Gregory, had been at the firm for 6 years and had expected, if anyone was going to be elevated to the oversight role that Amara now occupied, that it would be him. Gregory made his feelings known not through confrontation but through the particular kind of professional resistance that is hardest to address because it never quite becomes visible. Documents she needed took slightly longer to arrive. Information she requested was sometimes incomplete when it came. Twice she arrived at the morning reconciliation meeting to find that a report she had asked Gregory to prepare the previous afternoon was not ready. She said nothing about this for 3 weeks. Then, on a Monday morning, she walked into Gregory's workspace while he was in the middle of something else, set a single sheet of paper on his desk, and waited. He looked at the paper. It was a side-by-side comparison of the firm's reconciliation timelines from the 6 months before she joined and the 6 weeks since the new framework had been implemented. The improvement was not marginal. The time taken to identify and resolve discrepancies had dropped by 62%. The number of outstanding queries from buyers, which had been a persistent problem, had dropped by 41%. Every figure on the page was sourced and verifiable. She did not say anything about Gregory's delays. She did not need to. What she had placed on his desk was a document that made the value of her work visible in terms that could not be argued with. Not by Gregory, not by anyone who might be inclined to suggest the elevation had been unearned. Gregory looked at the paper for a long moment. Then he looked at her. She met his eyes steadily. He looked back at the paper. He nodded once. After that, the documents arrived on time. By the third month, the morning reconciliation meeting had grown from 3 people to 7. Musa had expanded the scope of what Amara oversaw to include the transport operation, and 2 of the depot managers now attended to present their weekly figures for her review. She ran the meeting efficiently and without ceremony. She asked the questions that needed asking, recorded the answers, followed up on anything that required follow-up, and ended the meeting without padding it with unnecessary conversation. At the end of the 3rd month, Musa came to her office. He sat across from her desk, the wide, heavy desk, and looked at her in that way he had of paying attention to things he found worth paying attention to. "I have something to tell you," he said. She waited. "The solicitor has concluded the legal process with Franklin," he said. "We have recovered 67% of the documented amount." She nodded. This was within the range she had estimated. "More importantly," he said, "I have spoken to 2 colleagues in the district who operate similarly sized businesses. Both of them have heard about what happened here, and about the system you put in place. Both of them want to speak with you." She looked at him. "They are not asking for you to leave," he said. "They understand you work here. They are asking whether you would be willing to consult, on a separate basis, outside of your hours here, to review their operations and advise them on their systems." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It had 2 names on it. She looked at the names. "This would be additional to your current salary," he said. "I would not reduce your hours here. I am raising the matter with you rather than deciding it for you, because it is your decision to make." She looked at the 2 names on the paper for a moment longer. "I will think about it," she said. He stood. At the door he paused. "One more thing," he said. "I have recommended you to a local business association. They are looking for someone to run a short training series for young staff. Basic financial record keeping. 4 sessions. They asked if you would be interested." She looked at him. "Young women, mostly," he said. "From the rural areas. Girls who have been placed in office work without any real training in the figures." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I will do that one." After he left, she sat at her desk in the room with the garden window, in the chair with the armrests, and she was very still for a long time. She thought about a girl who was 9 years old at a market stall, making a list of transactions on a folded piece of paper because her mind would not let her do otherwise. She thought about a green notebook with a worn cover, kept in the drawer beside her narrow school bed, filled with columns of figures that no one had asked for and no one had seen. She thought about her mother, sitting at the kitchen table with that notebook open in front of her, saying, "You have a strange mind," not unkindly, not proudly, but with the particular quiet of someone who sees something and does not quite know what to do with it. She thought about her father, and the morning she left, and the way he was already in the field when she walked down the red dirt road. She thought about Auntie Vera's warm smile, and the women clicking their tongues, and the gray apron folded over the shelf in the storeroom at Birch and Low. And then she opened the new ledger on her desk and picked up her pen and started work. She did not let herself sit in the feelings for long. She never did. What she felt in those moments, the complex, layered thing that had no single name, that was partly grief and partly relief and partly something very close to a kind of angry, patient triumph, she carried inside her own chest, quietly, the way she had always carried everything that mattered. The numbers on the page in front of her were clean and waiting. She began. 6 years passed. They passed the way years pass when a person is deeply occupied, not slowly, not quickly, but with the texture of useful time, time that is filled with work and growth and the small daily accumulations that add up, over months and seasons, to something you can stand back from and recognize. Amara Osei was no longer the cleaning girl from Birch and Low. She was no longer Musa Okafor's head bookkeeper, though she still consulted with his operation twice a year on a formal retainer. She was the founding director of a consultancy practice, 2 rooms and a shared reception desk at first, a full floor of a properly leased building by the 4th year, 7 members of staff by the 6th. The practice was called Osei Financial Consulting, and it was known in the district and increasingly in the region beyond the district for a particular kind of work: financial review, system design, and the tracing of discrepancies in business accounts that other auditors had missed or failed to find. She was 31 years old. She wore a proper suit jacket that she had bought with her own money from a shop in the main street of the district town. She had a business card. She had, on 3 separate occasions, declined lucrative offers to join larger firms in the regional city, because each time she looked at the offer across a table and weighed it against what she was building, the building won. The building was hers. The firm was hers. The name above the door was hers. On the wall of her office, not the room at Musa Okafor's building, but her own office and her own practice, she had framed a document. It was 11 pages, handwritten, slightly worn at the corners. She had it framed simply, in plain wood, with no nameplate and no explanation. It hung behind her desk at a slight angle, because the wall was not quite level, and she had never bothered to fix the angle, because she had come to think of it as appropriate. Nothing about how she had arrived here had been precisely level. New clients sometimes looked at the framed pages and asked about them. She always said the same thing: "It is something I finished." She did not explain further, and she did not need to. The people who mattered, the people who sat across her desk and placed their accounts in her hands, understood from the way she said it that it was the beginning of something, and that the beginning was the important part. The training program she had agreed to run for the business association, 4 sessions, local girls new to office work, had not ended after 4 sessions. It had continued. Other businesses had asked to send their staff. She had formalized it into a quarterly program, and then into something more structured still: a short certificate course offered through a partnership with the district's vocational training center. 41 young women had completed it by the end of the 6th year. Several of them had gone on to bookkeeping roles that led to other roles. One, a girl named Rose, who had arrived in the first session with no notebooks and borrowed a pen from the woman beside her, was now a junior accountant at a regional firm in the city. Amara kept a list of their names in the inside cover of her current notebook, not for any practical purpose, simply because the list was real, and real things that were good deserved to be written down. She was back in the village on a Saturday when her father arrived. She had come for a reason entirely unrelated to Harold. There was a woman in the area, a farmer's wife who ran a small cooperative, who had asked her to look over their group accounts. She had planned to spend the morning at the cooperative, have a meal somewhere in the village, and drive back to the district town by afternoon. She had not planned to visit Harold. He arrived at the cooperative's meeting room just as she was packing her bag to leave. He was older. Of course he was older. 6 years had passed. But the change in him was more than age. He was smaller somehow, in the way that people become smaller when the weight they have carried for a long time becomes heavier than their frame. He was wearing the good shirt she remembered from important occasions when she was a child, a dark blue shirt, ironed. He had combed his hair. He was carrying nothing, which was unusual for Harold Osei, who had spent his entire adult life carrying something from one place to another. He sat down across from her at the cooperative's table without being invited, and for a moment he simply looked at the space in front of him. "I heard you were here," he said. "Yes," she said. "People talk," he said. "They always have," she said. He was quiet. She waited, which was a thing she had always been good at, and which she suspected. Looking at him now, he had never fully understood about her. "You are doing well," he said. It was not quite a statement and not quite a question. "Yes," she said. "Lydia showed me something about your business in a newspaper," he said. "There was an article." There had been a short piece in the regional business paper 3 months ago, following a particularly significant case her practice had handled. She had not sent it to anyone in the village. She had not thought of it. "I did not know it was there," she said. He nodded slowly. Another silence. She looked at him across the table and felt the thing she always felt when she thought about her father, the complicated interior movement that was not anger, and was not forgiveness but was something older than both, something that had been installed so early it had become structural, part of the architecture of who she was. She did not try to name it. She had stopped trying to name it years ago. "I would like to come and see it," he said. "Your office, if that is acceptable." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "it is acceptable." He came the following month. He wore the blue shirt again. Lydia drove him, and Lydia waited in the car. He stood in the reception area of the consultancy and looked at the name above the door, and then he looked at the 7 desks visible through the glass partition, and then he looked at his daughter standing in the center of all of it in a suit jacket that fit her correctly. She showed him the office. She made him tea herself, in the small kitchen beside the meeting room, and she set the cup in front of him at the meeting table and sat across from him. He wrapped both hands around the cup the way he had always wrapped his hands around his morning tea at the kitchen table in the village. Some things did not change. He did not say he was sorry. She did not expect him to. Sorry was not a word in Harold O'Sea's vocabulary, and she had accepted this long ago as simply a fact of his particular construction, the way you accept the fixed properties of any material you work with. He drank his tea. He looked at the meeting room walls. He looked at the framed 11 pages through the open door to her office. "What is that?" he asked. "Something I finished," she said. He looked at it for a moment. "You always finish things," he said. "Your records, your notebooks. I used to find them, you know, when you left them in the kitchen drawer. I used to read them." She looked at him. He was still looking at the framed pages through the door. "I did not know what to do with it," he said. "At the time, I did not know what a girl was supposed to do with a mind like that." She held her teacup and said nothing. "I should have known," he said. It was very quiet, the quietest thing Harold O'Sea had ever said in her presence. She looked at her father. She looked at the hands around the cup, and the blue shirt, and the face that was older than she had last, looked at it carefully, and she felt the complicated interior thing move through her and then settle, like figures finally balancing at the bottom of a long column. Not resolved, not undone, just settled, where it was going to live. "Drink your tea," she said. He drank his tea. On the drive back from dropping Harold at the bus stop, she sat in the front seat of her car, her own car, a sensible, practical vehicle she had bought in the 3rd year of the practice, and she was quiet for a long time. She drove through the district town streets with both hands on the wheel and the late afternoon light coming through the windscreen, and she thought about the green notebook she had kept at 9 years old, and the market list, and the folded paper her father had put in his pocket and never mentioned again. He had read the notebooks, all those years. He had found them in the kitchen drawer and read them, and he had not known what to do with what he found. She thought about this. She thought about a world that had not given her father the language for what his daughter was. She thought about all the things that go unnamed, and all the people who are filed under useless simply because nobody has found the right word for what they actually are. She parked outside the building. She sat in the car for 1 more minute. Then she got out, walked up to the office, sat at her desk beneath the 11 framed pages and the slightly uneven wall, and opened her current notebook to a fresh page. 41 names, written in the inside cover, in a hand she recognized as her own. More names coming. She picked up her pen. The work was nowhere near finished. It never had been. It never would be. And that, she had understood for a very long time, was exactly the point.